Hello and welcome to your economics podcast about your upcoming PPE. So you've got your PPE exams, which is starting a couple of weeks after half term. I think it's the week beginning the 12th. And for economics, you are going to have 1 2-hour paper in the real thing. Next summer, you've got 3 papers, paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, that are all 2 hours long. But for the purposes of your PPE, you'll have a 2-hour exam paper. The first section, which will be a data response, is going to be based on microeconomics. The second section, which is the essay, is going to be based on macroeconomics. For the data response, you will have a choice of 2 different scenarios. So you've got 2 different sets, context 1, context 2. You choose one of them, and obviously you complete all of the questions from that paper, that context. For the second section, the essay, you'll have a choice of 3 essays. And again, you've got a choice of 3. You do the 15 and 25 marker for each one. When you're choosing the questions, it's one of the most important things you'll do in any exam. When you're choosing your question, you have to make sure you are choosing the question that is best suited to you. So look at the 25 mark question and base your response on that, or base your choice, on that. If you think that's a 25 mark question that I understand, that I know what I need to do, then that's the one you should choose. Timing will be probably an issue for some people, and it will be that way possibly for a while yet, because you need to practice it. So with timings, you definitely need to spend 1 hour on each section. So you should have 1 hour on your micro, 1 hour on your macro. You need to be very strict with that. I'll go into a bit more detail of how you split the timings of the other questions, but 1 hour each. You just need to stop. If you haven't finished one section, you just need to stop and start the other section. With your longer question, so with a 25 mark question on the essay or the data response, you need to be spending at least 30 minutes on the 25 mark question. Don't spend too much time on the 9 marker or the 15. You need 30 minutes on the 25 mark question. That is where most of your marks will come from. That is where your grade will be decided. Once you've chosen your choices, your context for the essay and data response, whichever order you do them in, it's up to you again. You could do the essay first, you could do the data response first, that's up to you. You need to spend 5 to 10 minutes planning and reading the data for the data response. So if you see someone next to you starts writing straight away, if they're writing their answer, they're doing it wrong. You need to carefully read the data and plan. So you need to read the 25 mark questions for the data response, and I would strongly urge you to simplify it. What does it actually want you to do? So it might be alcohol. How do you stop people consuming alcohol for a data response? And just write a very simplified version, how to stop people consuming alcohol. And you can do that for your macro in the essays as well. Is inflation the best way? Is monetary policy the best way of controlling inflation? So simplify the question to get to the point of what they actually want you to talk about. Once you've simplified your question, you should be reading the data for the data response. That means you go through and highlight it with any points that you think you're going to use. Now, you should be using the extract at least 3 times, probably more, but you want at least 3 uses of the extract. Quite often it will give you very good things in terms of application. So maybe the downsides of smoking, that's you're applying it. It's a negative externality. It will give you some of the reasons. Quite often these days the extracts even give you evaluations. So the extract might say, however, about a policy, and it will actually go through. So the data is very, very important. But even for the essay, you should be planning. What are your 3 points you're going to talk about? What things are you going to cover? So before you start rushing in, it's better to write less about the correct thing than more about the wrong thing. Going on to that, timing will be tight, as I've already said, so you probably will struggle to get everything you want down in the time. So think back to what I've called in the past perfect paragraphs. Your aim really is to get 2.5 good points down, especially at this stage. When you've got more practice, it will become easier for you. Your timing will be better. You'll be able to write quicker. But at this stage, if you write 2 very good paragraphs and a third point where, in all reality, you'll probably run out of time, that is what you're after. So in your perfect paragraphs for the point you're making, ideally, you should have a definition, a diagram that is properly labelled, incorporated and explained, one point or policy that you're talking about fully explained with a chain of reasoning. This causes this. You go through the full explanation. If it's a data response, it will have a quote. If it's in the essay, it will have a link to the real world, usually the British economy for macro. And then you will evaluate. So you'll start your evaluation saying, however, and the evaluation will incorporate more than one line. So you're looking for an evaluation, a good 4 or 5 line evaluation where you relate it back to the question, the scenario, and the topic. So to give you, so as an example, with a smoking question, so how do we stop smoking? You would use your strips, your policies of how to stop it. You would define maybe negative externality. So smoking is a negative externality because the external costs are put onto a third party without their knowledge or desire. You would then draw the negative externality in consumption diagram, where you would go through explaining where the social optimum is, where the private optimum is. The policy you might use, for example, is tax, and you could show that shifting, and then you might explain how the tax would work. The tax would be levied on the cigarettes. This would deter some people from consuming it. Relate it to the UK. So currently in the UK, cigarettes are already quite heavily taxed. And then you might evaluate by saying, however, cigarettes are inelastic, so it might not stop consumption that much. Or however, this might lead to a government failure, of information failure, of what level to put the tax on. And then you go through to explain. That links into how your work will be marked. So your work will be marked by an examiner on a level marking basis system. So to get a level 5, as I've showed you on the board before, it says it needs to be sound, focused analysis and well-supported evaluation. So sound means everything is correct. So that means your diagrams are labelled, your definitions are precise, you've done everything in that paragraph correctly. Focused means it relates to the question and you're answering what is asked to you, not just anything you wanted to answer. Analysis is the full explanation and chain of reason. So this causes this. You are going through the process of explaining. Well supported means you have either used real world examples, related it to the British economy for macro, and evaluation means you've said however. You might question the extent. You might look at government failure for micro. You look at the downsides, but something that doubts what you've just said. And that links in also to the marking criteria. So the marking criteria, you're marked on analysis, evaluation, and application. So application is data, real world. Analysis is explaining, chain of reasoning. Evaluation, the downsides, the extent, the other things you're looking at. Some tips for the exams. I've been an examiner for 10 years. I mark hundreds and hundreds of exam papers each summer. I'll be doing it again this year. And there are certain things that examiners look for. So when we go on to do some behavioural economics in the summer, you'll see what I mean by what sort of things examiners look for. So use lots of paper. So space your answers out, use clear paragraphs. Each paragraph, so in those perfect paragraphs, each paragraph should be making 1 point, evaluate all those things, then leave a line, go on to your second point. Sounds obvious, but when you get a messy, horrible looking answer, the examiner immediately is struggling to find what you're trying to say. With diagrams, it should be the last thing that you check. It's the first thing an examiner will see, so they need to be labelled. We don't want any what are called floating diagrams, i.e. they're just there without any explanation or link, so they need to be explained. Elasticity should be correct, so that's the last thing you should check. When you're quoting extracts, be explicit about it. So extract B says, and then put your quote in speech marks and then explain how you would use it. So examiners are going to spend a very short amount of time in reality next summer. The average is something around 8 minutes marking your exam paper. You want to make it as obvious and signpost each section as possible. Same when you are evaluating. So put the word however. It's a trigger word that examiners are trained to look for. So you underline the word however, so it makes it easier to spot, and also helps you because then if you've underlined the word however and then only written a sentence, you need to write more. So you underline your however when you start your evaluation, and then go into some depth. In terms of the topics that are going to come up in the PPE, a few students have asked, it is anything that we have learned so far. So for microeconomics, there isn't a multiple choice section in your PPE. The multiple choice section next summer will only appear on paper 3. but you're not going to do one for the PPE. So the topics for microeconomics, it could cover anything. The scenario could be anything as well. So what you're applying it to from the data could be anything. But obviously we have covered demand and supply, so things that affect demand, things that affect supply, showing that on a diagram, shifting it. We have covered elasticities, so you need to know what the elasticities in demand and supply is. Elastic is inelastic, reasons and causes for that, so you can relate it. And obviously we have done market failure being a big topic, so we've done the negative, positive externalities, public goods, merit and demerit, a little bit of income inequality, how to redistribute, that you've just done an essay on. So any of those things could come up, but essentially what will be asked is to solve something. You are given a problem. So in the essay you've recently done, it was the problem of poverty and inequality. You're given a problem and you have to solve it. So the solutions normally come in via the strips, so state provision or subsidy, tax, regulation, which includes lots of things, maximum rent, minimum price, information, so it could be good or bad, cigarette packaging saying it obviously damages your health, public health campaigns about eating 5 fruit a day is good, pollution permits is only if it's a negative externality in production, and then state provision, so things like education, the police, the health service, where it's just provided for you as a merit good. For each of those you would need to evaluate, so downsides, why it might not work, elasticity, government failure should definitely come into it. For macroeconomics, again, it could be anything, but you have covered the 4 macro objectives. So you've got high economic growth, keeping inflation stable and low at 2%, low unemployment, and a balance of payments equilibrium. So your trade deficit, or not having a trade deficit or surplus, but it being in balance. So in your essay question, it could ask you a set of policies to use. So is fiscal policy better or monetary policy better to achieve something? The use of supply side policies. Why do we want unemployment to be low and how is it achievable? How would you get a balance of trade equilibrium? Best way to get out of a recession. But the questions quite often repeat themselves if you go back past exam papers, questions very often repeat themselves. They actually only ask a few sort of limited range of questions. So over the half term and the week before, you need to be revising your topics, but I would stress importantly, you need to revise your timings and what you're writing in each. So for a 2-mark question, for the data response, you are looking at a calculation, probably a percentage. So make sure you know that and put your units in, make sure you know how to do that. For the 4-mark question on the data response, you will get a table or graph. You need to look at that data, use it. So say what that data shows in the year 2000, blah, 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 and go through what it says at least one point. Then you make an economic comment, so you link it back to what the question's asking you. For a 9-mark question on the data response, you need to define, draw a diagram, explained, and discuss 2 points with use of the extract with 2 data quotes. And with the 25-mark question that we've done lots of times already, you need to introduce it. So what's the problem? What are you going to do? You need to define something. Use at least 1 diagram. So it might be externalities. It might be explaining your policies. You try to do 3 policies, but in reality, you might only have time to do 2 policies or 2 points fully explained. Go through the chain of reasoning. You need at least 3 data extract quotes. Extract A says, extract B says, and then quote it. Evaluate each policy, so why it might go wrong. This needs to be in depth, underline the word however, and then you conclude. So if you can only do 2 of those, that's what you aim for. You aim for 2 level 5 paragraphs. The 25-mark question on the essay is basically the same, but instead of using a data quote, you relate to the real world and use examples. And for the 15-mark question, it's a bit more in depth, but it's very similar. You define, you discuss 2 points with a diagram, and you relate it to the real world. Best of luck. Any questions, obviously, please come and speak to me.